Well, if you haven't heard it yet, breaking news, Donald Trump has officially signed a bill that ends the 30% federal tax credit for residential solar at the end of 2025. That's right. And what's already being called a bill that could dismantle the residential solar industry as we know it, these changes will dramatically affect the value proposition for solar going forward. And if you're planning to go solar in 2025, or you've been thinking about making the switch before the tax credit disappears, this is something you really need to understand because it could seriously impact you and frankly, might be the last real opportunity to go solar before the costs go up significantly. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what this bill changes when it comes to solar tax credits, what steps you need to take this year as a homeowner in order to lock in the credits before they expire, and how these policy changes could impact electricity prices moving forward. Let's dive in. So solar as it exists today, if you buy a system for your home, meaning that you're the owner of the system, whether you pay cash or you finance it, but you own it, you are currently eligible for a 30% federal tax credit. And that's part of Section 25D of the Internal Revenue Code, which covers clean energy programs like solar. So let's just say that you purchase a solar panel system from a contractor and the total project cost comes out to $30,000. Well, under the current rules, you'd be eligible for a $9,000 tax credit. Now, just to be clear, this isn't a rebate, it's a federal income tax credit, which means you do need to have a tax liability in order to claim it. So if you're self-employed or a 1099 contractor, this credit reduces your tax liability at the end of the year. Or if you're a W-2 and you prepay taxes throughout the year, you'd likely see that credit come back to you in the form of a larger refund. And the great news is that in both instances, this credit can carry forward. So if you can't use it all in the first year, you could actually roll it over and apply it to future years. Now, this 30% tax credit is extremely important because it exists to make the economics of going solar actually pencil out. This might come as a surprise to a lot of people who are new to solar, but most homeowners don't just go solar because they're in love with the technology or because they want to go green. That might be part of it, but the main reason why most people go solar is to save money. They treat it like an investment. And that makes sense because here in the US, electricity isn't subsidized by the government. It's sold by private for-profit utility companies. And in many places, those utility companies are regulated monopolies, which means that you don't get to shop around. You're stuck with whatever power company covers your area. And those companies know that. They have no competition, so they can raise the rates year after year. Compare that to places like Mexico, where electricity is heavily subsidized and residents might be paying around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Here in the States, though, it's a completely different story. For example, in Southern California, most homeowners are stuck with Southern California Edison, and they're paying 40 to 50 cents per kilowatt hour. And in 2024, that utility company made over $1.5 billion in profit. So for the past 20 years, solar has offered the only real escape. Instead of being locked into paying a utility forever, homeowners realized that they could install solar panels, make a one-time investment, and then own a system that powers their home for the next 30 to 40 years. It's really the only way to get out from under rising utility costs without having to use less electricity at home. Now, 20 years ago, solar was a lot more expensive, about double what it costs today. So in order to make it more accessible and speed up adoption, the federal government introduced a 30% tax credit, and that changed everything because suddenly the math worked out really well. If you paid cash, you could break even in under 10 years, and if you financed your system, your monthly payments were usually much lower than your average electric bill. And this is why in every solar ad that you've seen, every door-to-door pitch, it always focuses on solar as an investment. And that's exactly what the government recognized when they created this tax credit. Now, this 30% federal tax credit was recently extended by the Biden administration as a part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed in August of 2022. Originally, the tax credit started back in 2005, though, was capped at $2,000. In 2008, the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act removed that cap and extended the credit. It stayed at 30% until 2020 when it started to step down. First to 26%, then to 22%, before getting bumped back up to 30% and extended through 2032. After that, the plan was for it to step down to 26% in 2033, then 22% in 2034, before phasing out completely in 2035. But here's the thing, these programs are not permanent. They can be changed or repealed at any time by any future administration, and that's exactly what we're seeing happen now. You see, since taking office, the Trump administration has made it a priority to reduce federal spending. At first, many folks, including in the solar industry, assumed that the tax credits for rooftop solar would remain, because after all, they support American manufacturing and provide tens of thousands of jobs. But then, in May, the House passed a bill that eliminates the 30% residential solar tax credit for homeowners at the end of 2025. Now, there's one thing which is extremely important that homeowners need to understand, and this is buried in the fine print of the bill. In order to qualify for the 30% federal solar tax credit before it expires, you must have the system fully installed on your property by the end of the year. Right here on page 501 of the bill, under the section about ending residential clean energy credits, it states, quote, Section 25D is amended by striking, quote, to property placed in service after December 31st, 2034, and inserting, quote, with respect to any expenditures made after December 31st, 2025. Now, in order for us to understand what they mean by, quote, expenditures made, we have to scroll down to United States Code section 25DE, which says, quote, except as provided in subparagraph B, an expenditure with respect to an item shall be treated as made when the original installation of the item is completed. Now, subparagraph B refers to new construction homes, meaning that for people living in homes at the time of installation, the installation must be completed by December 31st of 2025 in order to qualify for the 30% tax credit. Now, contrary to the previous version of the bill, which we covered a few weeks back, the solar system no longer has to be, quote, placed into service, meaning approved by the utility company. And that's amazing for homeowners because there were a ton of concerns from solar installers previously about what would actually happen if they had installed a solar panel system for a homeowner, though the utility company had not turned it on and approved it, which can sometimes take about 1 to 3 weeks after the installation has been completed for the solar panels. And let me remind you that going solar is a construction project. It's not something which you get signed up for and the next day the crew's out at your property installing the panels on your roof. That would be really nice, but in most instances, when you get signed up, it will not be for 2 to 4 months that your solar installer will have all of the required things in order to legally install the system on your roof. Installers have to get permits from your local building department, they'll need to get engineer approved electrical drawings, and they need to get approval from your utility company for interconnection. And all of that takes a lot of time, assuming that everything goes smoothly. Now, if you are in the process of looking at different solar power options for your home, if you've already gotten some quotes, or maybe you need to get a price quote so that you can agree on pricing, figure out your equipment, and then get the process started so that you can be guaranteed a 2025 installation, as always, you can go ahead and reach out to me directly on the link below. I can chat with you personally, get the system spec'd out with you, and then go ahead and get the process started so that you can get locked into a system which is eligible for the 30% solar federal tax credit before it expires. I'm based in Southern California, but work for contractors all across the country, and on our website, you can see the states which we serve. Now, one thing about this bill that frustrates me a lot personally is that it actually favors leased solar panel systems over residential solar systems that the homeowners personally purchase. And what I mean by that is that within the bill, as stated in section 48E, the 30% solar federal tax credit would not go away until the end of 2028 for systems installed on homeowners' roofs that are owned by corporations. In other words, systems that are leased or purchased under the PPA model. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you would note that I've long been critical of solar leases, as I find they're not always sold in the best interest of homeowners and are often sold in a predatory manner in order to maximize profit for the solar installer. You see, when homeowners lease solar panels, they're essentially renting the equipment from a company for a period of 20 to 25 years. So they make monthly payments to the solar company, often lower than their previous electric bill, so it does look like a good deal on the surface. But many people don't read the fine print in these leasing contracts and end up getting stuck with massive annual escalators in their payments. On top of that, because they don't actually own the system, they can't claim any of the tax credits or incentives. And when it comes time to sell the home, that lease system can actually make things more difficult because the new buyers would have to agree to assume the lease contract, and not everybody wants to do that. Just ask any real estate agent who's had to sell a house with a leased solar panel system, and they'll tell you it's a disaster. Leasing is also a very predatory business model, in my opinion. These companies like Sunrun essentially install really cheap equipment on homeowners' roofs. They get them into these long 20 to 25 year lease contracts where the payments skyrocket over time. And then they take your tax credits and incentives, sell them to large corporations, and possibly even sell your leasing contract to other companies so that they don't have to be responsible for servicing in the future. That's why I've always recommended that if you're eligible for the tax credit and you plan on staying in that home for at least 5 years, owning your system is almost always the better move. But unfortunately, this bill shifts that advantage away from homeowners. It removes the tax credit for people who want to own their system while keeping it in place for a couple of years for the companies that want to lease them out. This is such a bummer because leases were already gaining in popularity over the past 2 to 3 years, and I think that in a couple of years' time, they'll account for the majority of new installations, and the reputation for residential solar will go way down as more and more homeowners get taken advantage of by them. Even Congressman Thomas Massie weighed in on this a couple weeks back, tweeting that homeowners will, quote, be seduced into leasing systems installed in their homes from companies who qualified for subsidies. And I thought author Alex Epstein summed it up perfect when he replied, quote, residential solar has a small lobby, corporate solar has a big lobby, So residential solar got screwed. So in my opinion, this is the craziest part of this entire bill. Lawmakers are saying that we've been subsidizing green energy too much and that the industry needs to stand on its own 2 feet, though for corporate-owned lease systems, which are often the most predatory deals in the industry, well, those tax credits can stick around for the next few years. So again, unless you're okay with being forced into leasing a system down the road, the end of 2025 is really your last realistic window to get into residential solar while the economics still make sense. And as a reminder, if you are in the process of shopping for different solar or battery options for your home and you would like to get a proposal, or maybe you already have a quote and you'd simply like to receive a comparison bid just to make sure that you're getting a good deal, feel free to reach out to me by booking a call using the link below in the description. You can see the states which we serve, and then from there, you can book a call to chat with me personally. We can get the system spec'd out for you and then go ahead and get the process started so that you can get locked into a system which is eligible for the 30% solar federal tax credit before it expires. Now, one major and often overlooked consequence of repealing clean energy tax credits is that electricity prices will very likely go up for Americans all across the country. You see, clean energy sources like solar and wind actually help reduce the strain on the power grid. Whether it's a large-scale solar farm or a network of wind turbines, these subsidized projects lower overall electricity costs because the utility companies aren't the ones paying to build them. And when utilities don't have to invest as much into new power plants, power lines, or expensive grid maintenance, those savings often translate to lower rates for homeowners. And the data backs this up. Earlier this year, the Clean Energy Buyers Association released a study showing that if these federal clean energy tax credits go away, electricity rates could rise nearly 7% by 2026. And for the average American household, that's just over $110 more per year in electricity costs. And that's just the beginning. The even more frustrating part is how this shift could give the utility companies even more power to raise rates without restraint. You see, rooftop solar has been one of the only real forms of competition that utility companies have had to worry about. For the past 5 to 10 years, these companies have known that if they hike up the rates too aggressively, homeowners could just say, forget this, and install solar. And when that happens, the utility company doesn't just lose money, they lose a customer for life. And that competitive pressure has forced them to be at least somewhat cautious with rate increases. But if residential solar loses its financial appeal, if the tax credits disappear and the costs go up, then utility companies no longer have that same check on their power. Now, this situation is pretty unique to the United States. In other countries like Canada, Mexico, and France, electricity is typically provided by state-owned entities. So the government keeps pricing relatively stable. But here in the US, electricity is sold on the private market, and most states operate under what's called a regulated monopoly, meaning that you only have one utility provider and zero competition. So take San Diego, for example. If you live there, your only option for electricity is San Diego Gas and Electric, a private for-profit utility. And well, here's the crazy part. SDG&E doesn't even generate the power that it sells to you. Instead, it buys its electricity from independent power producers, also private companies that operate natural gas plants, solar farms, or even nuclear facilities. And so this setup creates a massive issue. Homeowners have no alternative, and they're legally required to buy electricity from one provider, a provider that can raise rates as much as they want without having to worry about losing a customer to a competitor. That's why SDG&E reported a staggering $891 million in profits in 2024 alone, despite only serving a small section of the US. In fact, the profits have consistently hit record highs with $936 million in 2023 and $915 million in 2022. And with the California Public Utilities Commission approving another 2.6% rate increase for homeowners in 2025, they're projected to break almost $1 billion in profits next year. So going back to my original point, this is exactly why residential solar has become such a powerful alternative for homeowners. In most parts of the country, you have no choice but to buy electricity from a monopoly utility company. And that means that you're completely exposed to whatever price increases that they decide to roll out. And without these tax credits in place, that alternative starts to disappear. And unfortunately, that means so does the homeowner's ability to protect themselves from rising energy costs. Now, this video helped you understand the coming changes to the solar tax credit, but if you are in the process of shopping for solar for the first time, you really need to also make sure that you understand the common mistakes that people make for the first time when going solar. So make sure that you check out my video going over the 7 common mistakes that first-time solar homeowners make when going solar, which will pop up on the screen now. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.